Hey guys, we're back. It's Exploring World History, lesson number 18, and we're talking about nomads. The nomadic lifestyle has been romanticized in a lot of poetry and different books and things, movies even, and it kind of has this great feel, and everybody thinks that it's wonderful. So let's just kind of talk about what it really is, okay? And in this ancient world that we're talking about, it's they were called Bedouins, okay, and they're still kind of use that name today, but it comes from the Arabic word Bedawi, okay, and it means desert dwellers. Now, in more modern terms, you could be nomadic and wander and not necessarily be in a desert, but in the part of history that we're talking about now, they were truly desert dwellers, okay? They lived in tents, and not your tent that we might think of as we go camping here in the United States or whatever, but more of a very large type tent, and one tent would house one entire family, okay? And the family groups were broken down like this. Your immediate family was called your clan. And then several clans would get to come together. They were, cousin groups and things like that, and they would be a tribe. And the head of these tribes was called a sheik. And so this is how they lived. Each clan would be together, and then several clans would get together and create their tribe. And they would wander through the desert. They were desert dwellers. And desert survival is not very easy. I don't know if anybody has ever been to a desert, but if you have, think about actually living in there as opposed to just being there for an hour or a couple hours. However, their desert survival was greater because it was skills that they got passed down from generation to generation to generation. So they knew what was going on. They also would migrate with the seasons. And you're thinking, desert has seasons? Yes, it does. They may be very slight, but there is some change. So in the winter, they would actually get a little bit of rain in the deserts, and they would be able to travel deep into the deserts because there would be little, bits of water here and there. But as the summer came, it would get hotter and hotter and drier. And so their range would be limited, and they would have to stay closer to watering sources. As they did this wandering, though, they would occasionally run into other people or purposely go towards cities, and they would barter with the food and dairy and for other items, clothing that they made, etc. As they wandered the deserts, they utilized a lot of animals for different things. One of the bigger ones that they're known for and associated with is the falcons and falconry. It's something that I find just fascinating. But they would train these falcons for hunting, and then they were treated like a member of the family. And they would utilize them for several years, and then eventually they would release them back into the wild. They also had dogs and horses, the typical Arabian horse that one might think of. And then one of the animals that is usually associated with the desert dwellers, especially in the Middle East, is camels. And these were extremely important for a couple of reasons. One, they could survive long times with very little water because they could store water internally and they could go long places. But they also were a great pack animal. You could put your tents on it. You could put all the stuff that you needed to carry on it. You could even ride on them. So let's talk about now their culture, okay? It was definitely a different culture than we have, where in that culture, the men made pretty much all of the decisions, and the women did almost all of the labor. However, guests were treated very well, and usually were treated with tea. One of my favorite books, Three Cups of Tea, read it. It's very symbolic of the what they use the tea for with their guests. Also, with their tents, they had, like you said, they lived in their tents. Everything was done out of tents. Their family tents, they had two main sections: a main section and then a women and kids section. And the women and kid would do their work and sleep and everything in that section, and men would be in the other section. One of the things that was unique with them is their clothing as well. And traditionally, this clothing was made by the women. And it was made from the wool or hair of the camels or the sheep or the goats, the animals that they raised and kept with them in the desert. The men would usually wear a long, loose, light colored tunic topped with a sleeveless cloak, and then a head cloth. And this head cloth was called a kufiya. Then lastly, they would have a leather belt, and usually in their leather belt, they'd have a knife or a sword or something that they kept with them. Women wore loose clothes, usually black, but usually highly decorated, and they wore lots of jewelry, So as again Lee said, they would wander around, go to different places, and they would interact with different people. And the outside world, as they reacted to it, would kind of influence how they were able to do things, but also influence the outside world as well. So the nomads did not own any land, but they needed access to that land. And the different tribes traditionally would respect the land that those other tribes would use, and they would allow them to continue to use it and encroach upon it and whatever. They tended to make major trade routes and visit cities. So they, like I said, things were passed down over the years, over and over, and so they would go traditionally one spot to the other spot to the other spot and make their way through kind of a cycle of trade and things, and these routes became semi-predictable. This is something that has gone on for years and years and years, over centuries, and still somewhat is traditional today and goes on today, but the modern world and modern technology is starting to threaten this way of life. The landowners are getting more and more to the point where they don't want these people on their land. They're no longer free to travel from place to place. And then the younger people are being introduced to the technology of the modern world and don't necessarily want to be wandering the deserts and continue on a traditional family way, where they might not have cell service, they might not have other internet and different things that most people have at this point. So it's a very traditional way of life and something that's trying to survive and hang on, but is also struggling because of the modern world.